A racist cop pushes a black man on the subway platform. Seconds later, sirens surround him. What happens next will leave you speechless. Jamal Bennett wasn't expecting anything unusual when he stepped onto the subway platform at Fulton Street that evening. He had just wrapped up a long day at work, his mind preoccupied with the hours he'd spent staring at a computer screen. His tired feet dragged as he walked toward the edge of the platform, the familiar hustle of city life surrounding him. The train would be here in a few minutes. Jamal pulled his earbuds from his pocket and slipped them into his ears, allowing the hum of the music to drown out the noise around him. For a few moments, the world faded, and he was lost in the soothing rhythm of his favorite playlist. But that peace was short-lived. From the corner of his eye, Jamal noticed something. A shadow looming in the midst of the crowd, a man in uniform approaching him. Officer Grant Malley. His presence was unmistakable, even in the sea of commuters. Malley had a reputation, a man known for his short fuse, his prejudices, and his tendency to pick fights with young black men. Jamal could feel the shift in the air as the officer locked eyes with him. It was subtle at first, but Malley's gaze never wavered, narrowing into something cold and calculating. Jamal felt it, a subtle weight pressing down on his shoulders as Malley made his way toward him. Jamal tried to ignore him, pulling his gaze back down to his phone. But it didn't matter. Malley had already decided that Jamal was a target. Without any warning, the officer was right next to him, his hand outstretched. "Let me see your ID," Malley barked, his tone abrupt and filled with authority. His voice carried over the clatter of the station, slicing through the air with an edge that made Jamal's chest tighten. Jamal blinked, confused. He hadn't been doing anything wrong. "What's the problem, officer?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. He wasn't trying to escalate the situation. He wasn't trying to make trouble. He just wanted to get home. Malley's eyes flared with irritation. "Don't ask questions," the officer snapped, his hand tightening into a fist. "Just give me your ID." His posture was aggressive, chest puffed out, standing inches from Jamal's face. The crowds around them began to murmur, some people pulling out their phones. Jamal could feel the heat rise in his cheeks. He was used to this, used to being treated like he didn't belong, like he was always in the wrong just by existing in public spaces. But Jamal had learned to keep his cool. He didn't want to escalate things further. He turned away slightly, hoping to disengage. But the moment he tried to step around the officer, Malley shoved him, hard. The force knocked Jamal off balance, sending him stumbling backward toward the edge of the platform. His heart skipped a beat. The metal rails loomed just inches away, a deadly drop to the tracks below. Gasps rang out in the crowd. Jamal's foot teetered on the brink, his body just barely managing to right itself in time. His breath came in quick, shallow bursts as the adrenaline surged through him. The moment had become a spectacle. People were recording. Phones held high in the air, capturing every movement, every word. Jamal didn't look up, didn't seek their attention. But he could feel the eyes on him, the weight of every camera lens turned his way. His pulse thudded in his ears as he backed away from the edge, his eyes meeting Malley's for the first time since the shove. Malley didn't seem to care. He was too busy looking around at the growing crowd, feeling his power swell as the onlookers fell into line, watching, waiting for something to happen. "I said move," Malley shouted, his voice filled with menace, his hand reaching out again, this time to grab Jamal's arm. But then something strange happened. The police sirens began to wail from somewhere above ground, the sharp sound cutting through the moment. Jamal's eyes darted to the stairs leading up to the street, and he saw a flood of uniformed officers coming down the steps, not for him, but for Malley. Confusion rippled through the crowd. Jamal stood there, still reeling from the shove, unsure of what was happening. The officers moving toward Malley were not from his precinct. Their uniforms were different, their expressions stern. One of them, a tall man with a sharp jawline, pulled out his badge. "Internal Affairs," he said curtly, his voice carrying over the stunned silence. Malley froze. His eyes went wide as he turned to confront the newcomers. "What's going on here?" he spat, his face flushing red. I'm handling this. You have no right to. You're not handling anything, Malley? A deep voice interjected. Jamal turned slowly to see the figure who had made the voice. It was Lionel James. The older man, who had been standing just a few feet away behind a pillar, stepped forward into the light, revealing himself to the crowd. His trench coat fluttered slightly in the draft from the stairs, his glasses glinting under the fluorescent lights. He was just another commuter, or so it seemed, but there was a calm authority in his demeanor that immediately silenced the whispers. With a subtle movement, Lionel reached into his pocket and pressed a button. As if on cue, the flood of officers made their entrance. Malley's posture stiffened, his eyes flicking nervously between the new arrivals. He opened his mouth to protest, but Lionel stepped forward, lifting his hands slightly. "You're under arrest, Officer Malley," he said, his voice firm, no trace of doubt in his words. "For misconduct, abuse of power, and for targeting an innocent man. Your career's over." The words hit like a punch. Malley's mouth hung open, his mind scrambling for an explanation that wouldn't come. Jamal felt a knot tighten in his stomach as he watched the scene unfold before him. The crowd had gone silent, every eye now focused on the officers and the man who had just exposed the truth. Lionel reached into his coat and pulled out a badge of his own, flashing it for all to see. "I'm an undercover federal investigator," he announced. "I've been working on a deep case involving corrupt transit cops for over 3 years. And Officer Malley just made a very public mistake." Jamal's eyes widened as he took in the full weight of the situation. He'd been the unwitting catalyst for the downfall of a corrupt officer. The recordings, the public shaming, the moment where Malley had shown his true colors, all of it had already been captured and uploaded to a secure channel. "Where do we go from here?" Jamal whispered, more to himself than anyone else. Lionel turned to him, his expression softening for the first time. "You've helped close a 3-year investigation," he said quietly, handing Jamal a card. "Thank you for staying calm. We'll take it from here." Jamal stood there, still in a daze, as Malley was handcuffed and led away by internal affairs officers. The platform, once full of tension, now seemed eerily quiet. The weight of the moment sank in. What had started as just another ordinary night had turned into something far bigger than Jamal could have imagined. As Officer Malley was handcuffed in disbelief, his face a mixture of confusion and fear, Jamal stood frozen, his pulse racing, the weight of the situation pressing in on him like a vice. The air around them was thick with tension, the faint hum of the city's nightlife muffled by the chaos unfolding on the subway platform. Malley sputtered, repeating something about protocol, about resisting orders. But his voice was trembling, weak. It was a far cry from the imposing figure he'd been just moments ago. The very authority Malley had wielded over countless individuals now seemed to be slipping through his fingers. Jamal's eyes remained locked on the scene, unable to fully comprehend how quickly everything had shifted. A gentle tap on his shoulder broke his trance. He turned to see Lionel James standing beside him, his face calm but knowing. With a single, fluid motion, Lionel reached into his coat pocket and handed Jamal a small card. "You've just helped close a 3-year investigation," he said quietly, his voice measured, yet with a hint of genuine gratitude. "Thank you for staying calm." The words hung in the air, both a recognition and an apology. Jamal blinked, his mind racing. What do you mean?" he stammered, still in shock from the events. Lionel smiled slightly, almost ruefully. "You helped expose something much bigger than you realize. That officer," he gestured toward Malley, still writhing in the hands of the internal affairs officers, "was just the tip of the iceberg." Jamal's heart pounded in his chest, his breath short. It was almost too much to process. He had been just another commuter waiting for his train, and now he had unwittingly brought down a corrupt transit cop, and perhaps something much larger. His hands shook slightly as he accepted the card, the cool paper feeling foreign in his grip. The card read, "Lionel James, Federal Investigator." Jamal's thoughts scattered, still processing, as his gaze flickered between the officers taking Malley away and Lionel, whose calm demeanor seemed almost out of place in such a volatile situation. As officers gathered Malley's personal items, his equipment, a black notebook, and his phone, Jamal could see the gravity of the moment. One officer, a tall man with an air of authority, walked over to Malley's discarded phone. With a few swift taps, he activated the screen, revealing a series of encrypted messages. His eyes widened as he scanned the contents. "We've got everything," the officer muttered, more to himself than anyone else. Lionel was speaking again, his voice low but steady. "The conversations on that phone implicate not just Malley, but 2 supervisors and a sergeant. They've been running a network of corruption for years, manipulating evidence, covering up abuse, and silencing anyone who tried to speak out." Jamal nodded, the information sinking in slowly, like a puzzle piece falling into place. But even as the enormity of the situation hit him, a sense of disbelief lingered. How had his simple act of defiance led to this moment? His hands, still trembling, gripped the card tightly, as if anchoring himself to reality. Lionel lowered his voice further, as though sharing a secret. "We've been investigating for years, but we needed something that would stand up in court. Something irrefutable." He gestured to the gathered officers, who were now beginning to secure the area. Malley's actions triggered everything. His abuse was just the push we needed to bring down the whole operation. Jamal's thoughts swirled. He had done nothing but try to walk away, to avoid confrontation. And yet, his decision to remain calm, to not escalate the situation, had inadvertently provided the final piece of evidence they needed. His gaze wandered to Malley's handcuffed form, the officer's expression now one of complete disbelief. A small, bitter smile tugged at Jamal's lips as he realized that for once, the system had failed the corrupt. Back at the precinct, however, things were moving at a rapid pace. Lionel had already left the platform with the arresting officers, leaving Jamal to process the events. The operation, years in the making, was gaining momentum with each passing minute. Lionel's team had been watching, listening, waiting for the right moment. They had gathered testimony from whistleblowers, cross-referenced hundreds of files, and surveilled countless officers. But without Malley's own missteps, his blatant aggression toward Jamal and his subsequent arrest, the case had lacked the irrefutable evidence it needed. Now they had everything: civilian videos, surveillance footage, encrypted messages. The timeline was laid bare, and it painted a picture that no one could ignore. As the news spread, the city's pulse quickened. Protests erupted outside precincts, with crowds chanting for justice, demanding accountability. It was all happening so fast, the rush of events overwhelming Jamal. He had simply stood his ground, but in doing so, he had unknowingly become part of a larger fight. And while he wanted nothing more than to retreat into his normal life, the weight of what had occurred pushed him forward. The next morning, Jamal sat in his apartment, the hum of the city outside his window a constant reminder of the world he now found himself in. His phone rang with messages from reporters, community leaders, even strangers. Everyone wanted his story, wanted to know how a simple subway ride had led to such an explosive series of events. But Jamal wasn't ready to talk. Not yet. Instead, he agreed to meet with Lionel. The plan was to give a statement, but not in the way anyone expected. With Lionel by his side, Jamal walked into a crowded press conference, the cameras flashing as he took the microphone. His hands were steady now, his voice clear. "I didn't want any of this," he began, looking directly into the cameras. "I just wanted to go home, but I couldn't ignore what was happening. We black men are constantly feared, constantly targeted, just for existing in public spaces. And I'm tired of it. I'm tired of being afraid every time I step outside my door." His words were calm, yet they held weight. Jamal spoke not only for himself, but for so many others who had suffered in silence. He didn't cry. He didn't shout. He simply told the truth, and the room fell silent. The journalists scribbled notes. The crowd murmured in approval. And for the first time in his life, Jamal felt heard. His voice, though quiet, was powerful, and it reverberated through the room, striking a chord with those listening. As the conference concluded, Lionel leaned in close, his voice low. "You've just shifted the conversation, Jamal. You've made people listen." But there was one final piece of information that Lionel had yet to reveal. As the press buzzed around them, he turned to Jamal and said, "One of the supervisors arrested had been involved in a cover-up, one that no one knew about. A case where a teenager was pushed onto the tracks, and the department ruled it an accident. But now, thanks to you, we're reopening it. It's all connected. What you did tonight is bigger than you realize." Jamal absorbed the news, his mind still racing. A single act of resistance had pulled the curtain back on years of abuse, exposing a deep-rooted culture of corruption. What began as a routine subway ride had spiraled into a moment of reckoning, and Jamal, though reluctant, had become an unwilling hero. He didn't want the spotlight. He didn't want to be a symbol. He just wanted to go home. But as the investigation unfolded and more cases were brought to light, he knew there was no going back. The system had been forced to confront itself, and Jamal Bennett, once just a commuter, had played an undeniable role in its collapse. Disclaimer: the story you just watched is fictional, created to highlight issues of racial injustice and abuse of power. Its purpose is to raise awareness, promote empathy, and encourage meaningful discussions about justice, equality, and accountability in law enforcement.